Hi, awesome members of the Nest. Thank you for joining us. You could be anywhere, but you chose to be here with us. And tonight we're talking to Kelly McWilliams. How's it going?
It's going great. Happy to be here.
Yes, we're so excited to chat with you. For anyone who hasn't met you yet, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, I am Kelly McWilliams. I currently live in Seattle. I'm the author of 3 YA books. The first is Agnes at the End of the World. She's over there. The second book is Mirror Girls, which came out in 2022 and just released in paperback. And the third is my latest, Your Plantation Prom is Not Okay.
Yes. Yes. Cannot wait to dive into that more, and I'll have you give us your little elevator pitch for it in a bit. First of all, I would love to hear about how Y'all West was, and I know Jordan got to meet you and connect with you for a bit, but would love to hear about it from your experience as a fan, as an author, anything.
Y'all West was amazing, and the OwlCrate booth in itself was a wonder. It was huge. It had like the longest lines of any booth.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, we had all the publishers, like sort of social media marketing arms, but OwlCrate was the most impressive line. So it's definitely reaching the kids, definitely reaching the fans. But there were just thousands of people there. It was remarkable. Like when I saw that invite come in, I was so excited. It was a really fun experience, and I got to meet some authors that I'm, super fans of, and hang out with some old friends. So that's always good.
Who were some of your favorite authors to meet?
I was really excited to meet Elise Bryant in person.
Mm-hmm.
Have sort of an internet friendship, but we actually got to meet for the first time. And at the same time in California, she was not at Y'all West, but Christina Hammonds Reed, we got to have dinner the Friday before. So all of that was gold.
That is amazing. Actually, Christina was my first ever chat for Words and Whimsy when the Black Kids came out.
It's such a good book. It's such a good book. One of my favorites. Fun fact, she blurbed Mirror Girls.
Oh.
Yeah, so it says like steeped in atmosphere. Anyway, she's just like the best person.
That's awesome. Well, and if you want to share your love for Words and Whimsy with Elise, we have tried to get a chat with her and it hasn't happened yet. So
I kind of mentioned it, yes. I always say you guys are my very favorite book club. Like you advertise as the best book club, and that is just facts.
Maybe we'll have you do a little blurb quote for our website then of fact. This is fact.
This is facts. I believe that since like 2020. Yeah.
We love that, and we love you. Yeah, I don't know if it was because I also help set up our author chats, and I don't know if it was like sometimes we'll contact authors, publicists, and sometimes I don't know if they really pass along the invite to the authors.
Yeah, it can be wild out there. Like when you're emailing the publicist, you have there's no way of knowing if it's going to get passed on, like how well staffed they are at the moment.
Exactly. So. Yes. So, well, can you tell us about what got you first interested in writing as a career?
So my mother is also a writer. Mm-hmm. Her name is Jewel Parker Rhodes, and she writes middle grade books now. When I was younger, she actually wrote adult historical fiction and what we now call historical fantasy, although the term really didn't exist. But so she was a writer, and she would sort of bring me along with her into her world. Like I went to conferences and festivals, and I was passing out papers at her classes, and I would see her go into her office to work, and she would put up this sign that said, "Writing, no kids allowed," for me and my brother. And I was like, there's something amazing happening in there. And I don't know, I just started copying her, like copying the literal act of writing, which I think is really interesting because we talk about sort of daily pages and just butt in chair. And I really believe in all of that stuff because just bringing yourself and your presence to the work, I really think is all that you need. And that's just what I started imitating with her. And that's how I found a love for telling stories and writing books. And then there was a very long fallow period for me where, we all go through our 20s and we have to kind of like learn what we care about and what we're interested in writing about, what really motivates us to stick through kind of a tough industry and a tough job.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2020, I came out with Agnes at the End of the World, which is a book about a young girl who escapes from a cult. There's also a zombie apocalypse style pandemic. So just trigger warning, like for our actual world. But writing about sort of her feminist journey, it just really unlocked a purpose for me that I've tried to follow through with sort of all of my books. And so I think that's how it kind of got started.
I love that. I didn't totally forget about your mom being a writer, but I did until that moment. Has she passed on any wisdom or habits that have worked for you as well?
She's like a wisdom machine. It's like a gumball machine. I just put the quarter. I'm like Grandma Jewel. I call her Grandma Jewel for my daughter now. But no, she's the best possible kind of early mentor, and she does read all my work. And just recently, what was really exciting was she let me read some of her work.
Oh,
so getting closer to that kind of that friendship level with writing. She has a book on a retelling of Treasure Island that's coming out soon for middle grade. It's very exciting.
Ooh.
But her biggest piece of advice was always just to persevere. And a lot of her advice actually comes through the mother's perspective in your Plantation Prom. Okay, because she is not just an artist, but an activist. And so the idea of soldiering on, even when it feels like things will never change.
Mm-hmm.
I have a character named Jeanette that's also based on her a little bit in Mirror Girls, and she says, keep on swinging, and it's just, that is the most powerful thing I think that she has to tell, particularly younger writers. And if we have aspiring writers out there, it's just, life is long, just keep going with, keep spreading your message. And that's the very best that you can do.
I love that. Yeah, I was just thinking about if there was some real life inspiration between Harriet and wanting to be a historian like both of her parents. And
yes, she very much wants to. Harriet Douglas in Your Plantation Prom Is Not Okay very much is following in her parents' footsteps. They've been activists for all of their lives. And she's a teenager, but sort of has this feeling of having been an activist for her life. Right? There's kind of a generational thing there where she knows she's going to carry forward this work. She cares deeply about it, but she has to sort of figure out for her own mental health, how does she stay happy and healthy and whole while she's carrying these burdens, these inherited burdens on her shoulders.
Yeah, we will definitely dig into that a little bit more once we get to talking about the book totally. I know we chatted a little bit about what it has been like, and Jordan did too when she talked to you at Yale West, going from promoting virtually with Agnes to now being back in person. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it's been like this time around and with Mirror Girls for promoting?
Well, I really prefer in-person promotion, I will say. Virtual, it was how I started in that 2020 year, but getting to meet people in person is a very special thing. Not to say that I don't love my virtual opportunities too, but it gives something extra back. I will have sort of an in-person bookstore launch at Third Place Books in Seattle if anybody's around on next Tuesday at 7. Getting to meet the booksellers has been really incredible because that was sort of the piece. I speak to my publisher, I speak to my editorial team. I sometimes speak to readers through emails or on Instagram, but the people who really move things, the people who go in between are those booksellers, and I had no idea who they were, and it's just been a joy to meet every one of them.
What did you do on the day, because this book just came out on Tuesday, what did you do on Tuesday for the release?
Y'all, I am a mess. On my release day, it's always, so my problem is I write in a different genre for every book. And my editorial team makes jokes about this. They're like, well, what genre will happen next? And I don't even know. I can't even promise you. Actually, I'm returning to a little bit of historical fantasy, but so because I sort of change gears every time, Agnes had sort of a sci-fi speculative feel. Mirror Girls was hardcore historical fantasy set during Jim Crow. And then this is a contemporary. I feel like I never know how it's going to be received in the new genres. I feel like I'm always kind of a little bit of a newcomer. So on launch day, I'm always just like, you know, like I'm always just like, what's going to happen to me?
Yeah. But did you get like a cake or like anything to?
So I have been agitating in my house for a book cake for a very long time. It's close to getting one with Mirror Girls, but at the last minute, the cake maker had copyright issues.
Oh, I remember hearing about that. Yes.
I think I might have told you guys about this.
Yeah.
and for this one, we sort of missed the boat, sort of with Y'all West and everything going on. But I finally told my husband, who for whatever reason I feel like should be the one to get this cake. I feel like you shouldn't get your own book cake. Have somebody else do it. I was like, just have them write the words, because those are cool book cakes too. So maybe for Mother's Day on Sunday, I'll take a picture or something.
Okay. We'll be watching out for it. Well,
I'll let you know.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about the premise of Your Plantation Prom Is Not Okay?
Yeah, so one thing that virtual bookstore events have trained me to do is like, so Your Plantation Prom Is Not Okay is a YA contemporary set in Louisiana, and it's the story of Harriet Douglas, who lives on an old plantation that her historian father has turned into an enslaved people's museum. She's just lost her mother when two people move in next door to that old plantation, and that's an actress and her influencer daughter. And they have plans to turn that place that has been abandoned for years into a wedding venue, and also, it turns out, a prom venue. And she is just, that doesn't sit right with her. Like, she believes in this historical education, in fighting racism through that. And so she makes it her mission to try to cancel this plantation, which you would think wouldn't be too hard, but in fact proves quite perilous. So there's some social media, TikTok activism. There's a lot of feels. There's some heavy, hard truths in here, but we tried to lighten it up with a little bit of humor. And most of all, you get Harriet Douglas's journey from a girl sort of at the mercy of the world into a full-fledged activist.
Yes. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit more about the inspiration behind it, and maybe a little bit about your time in Louisiana where the book is set as well?
Absolutely. In terms of inspiration, this is the most cathartic book that I've ever written, and I think it was sort of destined to come sometime. But I decided to write it when I did, because I had just been sort of, it's flipped.
I know, I do that every time too. I'm like,
I had just been in the historical land with Mirror Girls, and I wrote about, a plantation in the 50s where people still lived, and sort of that plantation was on my mind, and the fact that the antebellum lifestyle is still so kind of like romanticized was very much on my mind. So I think I wanted to address some of the issues from this book in the present, and to show the way that things in some ways haven't changed as much as we would hope. But it goes back even further than that. I grew up primarily in Arizona, a little bit in Boston, a little bit in California. But I remember the school I was in Arizona did very short shrift to the history of human enslavement in the United States, as many schools did. They basically showed us the movie Amistad, which is a good movie, but is not, is not comprehensive, is full of that kind of white saviorism that we talk about now. And I felt so angry at the time as a teenager. And the thing is that when you're a teenager, you may be angry about the way that your culture is being represented, but you can't speak about it. You don't have access to the voice that adults have. Or, some teenagers actually do now with TikTok, and that's part of the story. But I remember feeling this kind of trapped feeling, like there was a truth that I knew that was not being spoken about, that was even being actively denied. And it was just a type of pain that I never forgot, and that I think I carried with me even into my adulthood. I went to college at a super fancy, Ivy League university that I was very excited to be at. And I remember walking around the school one day and seeing this plaque that talked about how this was this was Brown University, plantation house. And he had X number of slaves. And I was just like, why is there no memorial here? There is a memorial there now, and it's very beautiful, but there wasn't at the time that I went. And why, like, should people of color be sort of like stumbling into this stuff in a way where our history isn't honored, where it even feels a little bit like an attack to stumble into it? Like, it's like they preserved this beautiful plantation house. And it just, I've been thinking about history and the way that we handle it ever since, because Lord knows we could do a lot better. And then, of course, we had 2020 roll through, and we had the monuments coming down, which was very exciting to see. But to this day, I have to tell you, I walked into a cafe in the summer with my daughter here in Seattle, where I live now, and heard an old couple talking about a Confederate monument that they had toppled here. And what they said was, well, they didn't just bring it down, they vandalized it. And I just remember like feeling that same anger that I felt as a teenager rise again. And when I was a teenager, or when I was in my 20s, it's possible that I would have like turned around and snapped and gotten into a situation that I didn't. Like, because as a teenager, you want to speak, you want to use your voice, but you haven't really gathered your sort of power. And in this moment, because I was working on this book at the time, because I have the books behind me that I was able to just leave. I didn't want my daughter to be involved in anything ugly on that school morning. I knew that I had work that was pushing against this, working for me out in the world. And there was kind of like a peace and like a rest that I was able to find. And that's really also what I wrote the book about, was the way that a girl who sees how much is wrong with the world, how can she also rest?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hard to kind of bite your tongue in that moment, I'm sure, and kind of like swallow all those feelings, but they still need to like come out somehow.
Exactly. And I think that motivates, a lot of where the work comes from. And it has been a surprise as a writer to discover that there's so much peace in that, that putting something like that out into the world can bring you peace. I know so many authors who are also activists, and, both of us, all of us are exhausted, especially since 2020, and trying to find there's a mental health journey there. And that's really kind of what I wanted to chart. And Harriet Douglas's mental health journey really echoes my own.
Yeah, I mean, there's one question I'm going to skip to right now. So Harriet's heart and passion is something that we see in a lot of young folks today, and it obviously gives us hope for the future, but there's also the fear that like the younger generations are like burning themselves out. Was that like a fear for you writing this novel, or like were you hoping to like address the ways that you can kind of de-stress a bit and focus on your own mental health as well?
Yeah, I mean, I did sort of want to put that out there, but I should say, like, I'm definitely, nowhere near the first. I love the book Rest is Resistance. That's like my nonfiction gift that I'll like bring it to your house if you invite me over. I think that sort of hustle culture is really being questioned. That we're starting to ask questions about sort of the capitalist system that we're all in, that is working us so hard. And particularly, I think Gen Z is leading the charge against that. But I also know that grind culture is second nature to them. So I do see these marvelous activists, particularly on like TikTok, and I want them to rest, and I wish them the best, and I wish them some peace. And they're also doing like such remarkable and incredible things. But it's a vexed space, because I think social media has the potential to take from us as much as it has to give back. And so we want to sort of find like what are the right ways for us to honor the communities that we're in. And the Nest is like a good example of this, like really bringing people around the fire somewhere and giving something back. But yeah, you gotta be careful out there. I feel like Instagram is trying to like pull out my soul sometimes. You feel like the magician with the scarves.
Well, especially I'm not gonna assume how old you are. But I think me personally, I mean, like growing up, I mean, I like was like the age of AOL and instant messenger and stuff. And so kind of being there as social media was starting up with MySpace and all that stuff in some ways gives us, I think, a somewhat different perspective than the kids who it's like they've grown up and it's always been there. And
same. And I think it's important for us to sort of try to imagine what that would be like. Sort of have social media in your face every day in school. I also feel like for YA authors, it's part of our job to be hopeful and to be optimistic. So I really wanted to show the sort of positive side. You know, people ask now, we've had lots of conversations about TikTok since I started like typing up this draft, sort of like what it all means. And I don't necessarily have a huge comment on that, but I have a ton of hope and a ton of faith in the kids who are out there doing really good things. I just feel like we have to wish them the best. You know, we have to wish them the best, and we have to hope that they, you know, they find the light side of the force sort of inside these companies.
Yeah, and then who knows where we're going to go next with social media. It's a whole other conversation.
I love that we are hearing from Gen Z authors too. Like I think there's, you know, and I think that the more books that we have about this that are reckoning with social media, from your like social media thrillers to your contemporaries that really dig into it, I think that that's great. I know that there are, you know, some agents who are saying, you know, we don't want anything with social media. I strongly disagree with that. I think we have to be in there reckoning with it. At the same time, you know, when I had this book in copy edits, this book was originally set in 2025 for various reasons. Yeah. So and if you've read the arc is set in 2025. But while it was in copy edits, I got an email from my editor because Elon Musk had just taken over Twitter. And Twitter is a big part of how she leverages her work on TikTok to sort of this activist. And she was like, what do you want to do? Do you want to use made up names for all these social media companies? And I remember, which I did not do, we set it slightly in the past of where it was. It was a journey. But I remember emailing my agent and being like, this is wild. And he was like, yes, like this, the world is moving faster than we can understand or conceive. But I still think that it's our job as writers to try to reckon with it.
Well, especially when you're writing contemporary too, it's like you gotta be right there. I mean, there are some books where it makes sense that they either have it in a setting where you're not going to have phones or, you know, like whatever. But for contemporary YA, I mean, you know, they all have phones and are on TikTok all the time.
100%. Yes. Yeah.
So to take that out, I think would just be weird.
Right. Or like give even, you know, sort of warping it in some way or trying to ignore it. Yeah, 100%. And I think that that's amazing. Like contemporary is a new space for me. And I really have come to love it because it takes risks and it gets its elbows in there.
Do you think, I mean, because so you've done so many different genres, do you have plans to keep on with contemporary or go back to a different one or a whole other direction?
Yeah, I can't say anything super firm yet, but it's looking like my next book will again be about white passing, and that tends to work best sort of in historical. So it's looking like that, but actually I'm going even further back into the past, like jumping around. I feel like I'm in a time machine all the time. I had the 50s Mirror Girls, but I think we're going back to like 1920. So, yeah. And I like that. I do like exploring different times. I do love the research. One of the things about this book is even though it's set in our contemporary space, it's set on a museum. So it still has that deep link to the past. And I still got to read a lot and do a bunch of research, which is one of the things that like keeps me wanting to write books.
Yeah. I mean, tell us more about the research you did for this book, between the historical stuff, between influencer culture.
Yes, so I got TikTok just for this book. Like, it rearranged my brain. The connections are not the same for this book. I made some TikToks too. TikTok was really fun. The most important research that I did though was visiting the Whitney Plantation in Louisiana. And I had been to the Laura Plantation years ago, but the Whitney Plantation is a very special place because it's one of, I think, the 3 museums in the South that tells the story of human enslavement from the perspective of the enslaved. What that means is that every other plantation out there if you go to New Orleans, you stay in the hotel, you'll get this giant brochure. It'll be like alligator tours. And then it'll be like, have your plantation wedding here. It'll have like a little ad, or stay at this Airbnb, this antebellum themed Airbnb. But then the Whitney plantation is doing such good work, it will be in there too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that it does that's so different from what anybody else is doing. It's been doing it for years. It's an incredibly difficult visit to make, but it's incredibly moving and very much worth it. And it shocks me to this day that there are not more people preserving our history in this way.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an amazing visit that I got to make. And I sort of tooled around too in like the Metairie area, which is really where it's set. And New Orleans as well, because we stopped for food. Yes. But the Whitney plantation is a must see, I think, if you're in the country, like sort of to make the pilgrimage there. It was immensely valuable. And then I read a lot of Clint Smith's work. I read a wonderful nonfiction text called Representations of Slavery that actually looked at, in the early 2000s, what percentage of plantations or historical monuments that had anything to do with slavery were talking about sort of true facts, and how many of them were engaged in what this book called symbolic annihilation. And when you just talk about the parasols and you pretend that these places were all gone with the wind, it's a symbolic annihilation that you're performing. You're erasing the lives of people, and it's a violence that we can still feel today, because of course what happened during that time still echoes forward to today. So things that sort of, I got to read a lot of books that sort of gave me a language for thinking about this that I very much wish that I'd had as a kid. And I sort of try and work some of that historical theory in there for Harriet to try and pass that on. But yes, I recommend the Whitney plantation, and I also recommend the book How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. It has a chapter on the Whitney, but on so many different places in America that you may not know the full history of. Any of us, people of color, anybody. A lot of these histories have been really systematically buried.
Yeah, one of my questions was if the museum in the book was inspired by the Whitney Museum. So you answered that. Don't totally judge me, but my first exposure to the Whitney Museum was on The Real Housewives of Potomac.
Oh, well, I don't judge. No, that's actually incredible. That's like the Real Housewives franchise that I've been meaning to watch.
It's the best one.
That's what I hear. I'm like, where should I get started? And people are like, Potomac.
Do it. It's good. But yeah, Giselle's dad's family had passed through a plantation somewhere around Whitney, so they had gone to see it as a group. And
wow. Yeah, I mean, that's incredible that they were doing that. They have a very moving sort of memorial wall. So anyone who passed through there, you do find a lot of seekers, people looking for their people, because it was a great separation of families that was rooted in the separation of families, the entire institution of enslavement. So you have a lot of sort of lost and separated souls, and to make these spaces where people can start to reconvene. It's really powerful.
Yeah, and then one other thing that stuck with me from reading Your Plantation Prom is Not Okay, is when Claudia, the new neighbor, is breaking ground on a new structure, but like did not do any kind of archaeological look into the fact that there are most likely bodies buried in random places in the yard, and just how eye-opening that was.
Yes, and that was very much inspired by the Whitney too. When they became a museum, they hired a team of archaeologists to do heat mapping in the area surrounding all throughout the town. And they found a lot of unmarked graves. So breaking ground there is a very fraught thing. And the idea of her moving into this place that she doesn't know, that she has no roots or connections to, and digging things up, I think is like such a lesson for all of us. but yes, that's some powerful and heartbreaking stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I know you had touched on it a little bit, but so this book's commentary on America's deep-rooted racism from both a historical aspect and how much it is still evident today is definitely like a daunting task, but necessary for the reader to reflect on. How did you go about adding this conversation to the story, but while keeping it for a YA audience, but without shying away from like the nuance of the topic?
I think I got lucky with the voice, like sort of Harriet's beamed down to me as sort of a fully formed person. I was imagining what it would be like to grow up on a place like this,
Mm-hmm.
a place of horror that they're trying to transform into something that can prevent horror in the present and in the future, which is how I think a lot of the children of activists feel, whether they grow up on sort of a sacred place like this or not. And her voice just sort of transcended so much for me. Like it just was able to, like, it felt real, like she was having a real response to her life.
Mm-hmm.
And I could hear her in her humor. She often has kind of like a dark and sarcastic humor, trying to manage where she was and the emotional burden of that. And the way that she was looking to the future and trying to find like a strength to deal with where she was, with the loss of her mother, and also with the idea that she was going to go on like this, that once she knew all these truths, she couldn't just put them aside. She was going to be an activist for her life. She was going to need to spread this word because this word has been sort of repressed. It's almost like she had been born into a war, you know? And so she has a kind of, she has so many coping strategies, but she also was so extremely wounded. But I think for me, the reason that it was even palatable to write was just that she had spunk. And you knew, like I always knew from the first sentence that I heard her sort of speak into my head, I knew she was going to make it. And I think that is what comes through the book. But I have heard, you know, it's a difficult read. There are hard truths in here. And that's for sure. That's true. So I do appreciate anybody who reads it. And it's also, I think, the reason that I made the title so loud. You know, I knew a lot of people wouldn't pick this up, but maybe people in the bookstore will see it. Like my joke is like, they'll get that piece of the message, right? That I feel really strongly about, because, you know, it might be that, you know, you just see a title like this every now and then, but for a person of color in America, every time a celebrity gets married on a plantation, it's like, I feel like I'm getting hit with a sledgehammer every single time. And I don't understand why it keeps happening. And neither does Harriet, and she has to reckon with that. And so we sort of kind of like work it out together, but it intersects with pop culture too, which can be really fun. I actually wish I'd known about the Real Housewives, because that would have been in there.
Well, now you can use it on your press tour. Good luck. I can send you exactly what episode it is if you want.
That's amazing. Yes.
Well, speaking of which, like how, and I know in a lot of ways it is not your job to educate us and educate all of us about this, but what do you think, besides obviously your lovely book, how can we help educate people on the issue of like whitewashing history and the fact that people are still trying to make plantations wholesome?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing, do not get married on a plantation. Do not visit any tourist site that you haven't given some thought to in advance. Beyond the plantations, there are a number of sort of haunted museum type things in New Orleans that I truly recommend you steer clear of, because the truth is that our country as a whole hasn't reckoned with what it means to sort of all of us sort of coming from this background of this, the country started because of human enslavement. Because we haven't reckoned with that the way that, say, Germany has reckoned with the World War. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of romanticization. So before you go to those sites, before you engage in anything like dark tourism is really big, for instance, in New Orleans, you know, do your homework, do your research, look into it, and make sure that you're putting your money somewhere that isn't going to just perpetuate these kind of myths and tales and do read How the Word is Passed. I always recommend that to people.
I was just telling everyone in the chat that I own it and I have not read it yet.
It's a great read. I mean, I think what Clint Smith did so well was it's very I don't even want to say digestible, because it's like powerful, but it's something that's meant to reach everyone.
Mm-hmm. A little bit more narrative, and
there's narrative, and you sort of see his journey to going to these sites. You come along with him, which I very much appreciate. So it's it's fascinating.
Well, it'll probably be a future nonfiction rec for Words and Whimsy, I'm sure.
I mean, I'm hoping for a YA version someday. I don't know if that would ever happen, but I think that could be a really cool entry.
I know that's been a big trend for a lot of nonfiction books lately, is to do a YA version. So I hope so too. Well, what else do we got? So another aspect is there's a lot of important conversation about women and anger as well, with Harriet's rage that she is trying to get under control. How important was it to show Harriet as dealing with, I mean, grief and anger and rage, especially as a Black woman?
Yes, Harriet's grief, both for what's happened sort of in her culture's past and for her mother, manifests as rage. And she actually calls it, kind of pejoratively in her own mind, the rage monster.
Mm-hmm.
She feels like the rage monster is eating her life. And I remember feeling this too, that I wasn't always in control of my impulses around certain things. And she actually thinks that she has to learn to control it. But some of this book, she's actively in therapy. You know, her father is a professor, so he gets her into therapy. And what she's learning is that she needs to embrace it rather than control it.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us try and squeeze our voices small.
Yes.
You know, as women of color, we try and sort of like suffocate it. But actually, that's only going to harm you in the long run. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to make friends with those impulses and those feelings, and to use them as tinder when we need to, and to work with them. And I think that there's a lot of strength that can be found in that. Anger created this whole book. I've never had that experience before. You know, I've written books from grief, from excitement. To write a book from anger was really, really interesting to me. And I'm seeing more and more women writers doing that. You know, we have All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. And I love that we're starting to embrace this, because it's really important for our kids, our girls, you know, our teenagers, anybody who sort of identifies. It's just, we weren't always allowed to feel that way, and certainly not to express it.
No, I mean, I feel like it's my whole life, it's been just like, stuff that anger down, and like,
right. Yeah, right. Exactly. So smiles, you know, sugar and spice and everything nice. Yeah.
I also appreciated the part of the story about Harriet's mom and the fact that her cancer should have been caught way earlier, and just the whole crappy situation that is women's healthcare, but especially people of color's healthcare in the US. And
yes, where, you know, to this day, we sort of, with all the, like, I don't even necessarily want to call it progress, but with sort of the footsteps forward that we have taken, the change that we have seen to this day, where people of color get in trouble is anywhere that they connect with the system, like medical system, an education system can be extremely dangerous, prison system, anything like that. And the reason is that all of those things have deep roots in the way things used to be. And these institutions and these systems change very slowly, much more slowly than we do as individuals. Like, we can have millions of people identifying as liberal and as progressive, but you're still going to go to the hospital in your liberal city and you're going to have problems. You're still going to run into the police in your liberal city and you're going to have problems. And that is a powerful like issue that I always have wanted to write about. My family could not, I come from a mixed race family, so I'm biracial myself. I'm the lightest skinned members of my family, and we have, I couldn't have been treated more differently from my brother, who presents to people as a Black man. When I got into school, it was, she's so great, she's doing so well. Speaking of anger, even as a young child, if my brother had any kind of an outburst, the school would just crack down on him. Suspensions, threatened with expulsion at one point. Like this really sweet kid. The cops were called on him when he was walking in the parking lot one evening. And with hospitals and with doctors, I have a whole story there too. And I've written about this for Time Magazine. It can be very dangerous. So that was a precious sort of subplot to me. And what I wanted to show was how it's connected to everything that's happened in the past, how it ties into these same roots. So thank you for bringing that up. That's like a major sort of passion point for me with this book.
Well, and I liked seeing that they were able to take at least some kind of action for a malpractice suit and being able to have that option.
Yes. And part of the reason that they were able to do that is Harriet's family. And one of the things that she learns and reckons with is quite well off. Yeah. So she has quite a bit of privilege, being the daughter of a professor, a historian. So we all have to kind of like reckon with our intersecting privileges too. She has a childhood friend who doesn't have that, who if something bad happened in his family, this is her childhood friend who she does fall in love with in the course of the book, he couldn't bring that suit, right? So that was an interesting thing to be thinking about too.
Well, then, not to touch on a whole other topic of education, but yeah, I mean, seeing Harriet get suspended, which I still feel like is the dumbest punishment for kids ever, over an angry outburst that was quite justified, I'm sure something that plays out in schools all across the country all the time.
It's very much true. Like, as someone with a school-aged kid now, I see this. It's not just something that we sort of read about in the New York Times, like the criminalization of Black children. Like, this is like a daily thing. There is a public school near me that has started asking, as part of their interview questions, like, what will you do to be anti-racist?
Oh, that's good.
And I think that this is the step in the right direction that we need, because, as I said before, these institutions are very slow to change. They're very old. They're rooted in all those old principles. And so it's not enough to sort of like think that you're just not perpetuating things. You have to be taking an active, aggressive stance against the wrongs that you see.
So without spoilers, try to do spoiler-free chats if it's possible. What was the hardest part of the story to tell?
There were a lot of small things that were hard about this. Like, basically, when you sort of sign up to write a book, and I try and like think this way now, and this is a piece of advice my mother gave me, like, whatever book you pick, just know you're going to live there for a year, right? If you're kind of on the like book a year, like mid-lister schedule, you're going to live there for a year. It was hard to be here for a year, I would say. The research, even like sort of, what was on my desktop at any given time, really wanting to make sure I was very anxious that I would do right by this place and this history that's rooted in reality, even though, the Plantation Museum that I created is fictional. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned the Indigenous people that were there before. I wanted to really make sure that I get all my ducks in a row. And I felt this with Mirror Girls too, writing the historical. You just, like, you want to do justice. And I didn't want to skimp, and I didn't want to skip anything. And in copy edits, I'd be in here for like 12-hour days, double checking every line, really trying to make sure that everything had truth. Because what I'm talking about are lies. Like, when you have a plantation prom, you're telling a huge lie. You're saying that that's okay. You're saying that that makes sense for our world. And so if you're standing up and saying, well, no, here's the truth, like, you better get it right, and I just, I felt that burden very, very acutely. But in terms of the actual plot, like everything that she does,
Yep.
I enjoyed writing them. You know, I enjoy writing Harriet when she's making mistakes. She makes a ton of mistakes. I enjoyed writing about what her blind spots are. I enjoyed writing about how she falls in love, how she reckons with her grief. Like, I think that she's a fun person to spend time with. So she was not at all the challenge. It was more just kind of like those mental, you know, this is a concept that has been given such short shrift, and I want to make sure that I do that right. But I don't want to make it sound like this book is like super downer, because I thought Harriet was wonderful.
Harriet is wonderful, and I know it's not a downer, but it definitely is. It has so many moments, I mean, that make you stop and pause, at least me as a white person, of just things that some of us have not thought about before, especially, I mean, not that, as we've learned, not that Minnesota is without its racism, but the deep-rooted history of the South is not as present here. So.
Yes. Yeah. Every region is so different. Yeah. But we can always discover sort of what's happened in our paths too. Like I've been, you know, astounded by that there is something to uncover in every place. And I love to see other writers and reporters doing that.
Well, we also love chatting about covers. Did you get to have any say in the design of this one?
My imprint, Little Brown Young Readers, is incredible, and they always give me input, and they always give me wonderful covers. My biggest contribution was she's holding onto the sign. This is Harriet, her hands. And originally she didn't have any nail polish on.
I was wondering, because I noticed the nail polish right away and was like, yeah.
Yeah. My cousin Madison is getting ready to go to prom, and she's been planning her nails for like 6 months. So I was just like, no. She has to. The nails need to be elaborate. And they gave me some elaborate nails, which I was really excited to see. Other than that, you know, I love the sign. I love when I saw the sort of the plantation with the, you know, X through it. It was just like, that blew me away. And just honestly, like I feel like every single day I'm surprised that I got to write this book and put this cover on the shelves. You would not have seen this, you know, in the 90s. No. It just wouldn't have been allowed to happen. And I know this for a fact. Like my mother wrote a book in the 90s called Magic City. It was her second novel, which is such an important novel in terms of getting fans and getting traction. And it was about the Tulsa race massacre. And the media just buried it. Like that book, they could not sell it. They would not review it. It was just, and I remember as a girl, I had seen her put in a year of research in this. And I had seen all the old documents sort of on her desk and probably gotten a little bit of like secondhand trauma from that. You know, she was really in there. And we went to Tulsa, we went together. And I remember we were going into the courthouse and we saw a Klan rally when we were there. And she said, look, when you go on a field trip with your mother, you get to see the Klan. And I was like, this is what writing books is like, you know? But it's an incredible book. She always said it was her best book, and it absolutely had no chance on the shelves at that time. The happy end to the story is that they recently reissued that book. So you can find Magic City now with a new cover, living a new life, her best life. So for me, in terms of covers, it feels like a dream. I can't believe that this exists.
And it's definitely going to stand out on the shelves, and I hope that it does well. What do you, if you can distill it down into one thing, what do you hope that readers can take away from your book?
Oh, well, I hope that readers, whatever background they're coming from, I mean, one of the things, like we all have our struggles, we all have our histories and the cultures that we come from, and very few of them are being spoken about sort of loudly enough and being championed as much as they deserve. So I really hope that it's just the mental health journey that sticks with people. That, you know, as we all carry these burdens that our ancestors like bequeathed us, we've all been carrying some intergenerational burden for some time, that we can learn to carry it in a way that doesn't crush us, that doesn't, you know, make us smaller, but actually allows us to speak louder. So I hope that's what teens get. Yeah. But anybody too. Yeah.
You were very much able to get down to that point, and I love it. So what else do I have here? What would you say is the biggest thing you've learned about writing and publishing from so far from Agnes to now?
Oh, it has been a wild ride. I read tomes and tomes. Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, it's just wild, and to see how every book has its own life, and how people respond to it. It's really readers who create the life of your book. It's like you make this thing, you're alone in your office, and you type away, the world is falling down around you, right? And you soldier on, and you get this book out and you see what happens. I'm surprised to this day that people pick up and love Agnes. I still probably get more emails about Agnes than any other book, which is very interesting in terms of like it had fewer sales, it had a little bit less exposure, but it's like there was something in there that really connected for people. And then Nearer Girls, seeing the communities that it has gone into, and the things that I hear about that, seeing that hardcover come out, and then sort of the love that it got in paperback. It's just, I say like every book, it's like a lottery ticket, and not like of what it can give back to you, monetarily necessarily, but just in terms of what kind of opportunities you're going to see in the world. You never know who's going to pick up your book. You never know what's going to happen for you. It just is like this whole, I don't know if you've ever seen those cakes that like spray butterflies, you just don't know. It's like one of those. So it's exciting and hard to pin down. But if you are an aspiring writer, it's going to be a roller coaster. Like I heard somebody say the other day, like it will bring you to the lowest lows and the highest highs. And that's for everybody, anybody publishing, because we're publishing into this great world of readers. And just the unpredictability factor is so high.
Yeah, I will say anytime I have, friends who are looking for book recommendations and stuff, and I'm like, do you like cults? Do you like feminist books? You need to read Agnes because it's so good.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun writing Agnes. It has tons of action and adventure, and I have made several promises to several bookstagrammers that I will write another book like Agnes soon. It's my most epic book. The people who write these epic fantasies, they put one a year. I don't know how they do it. I tell people there's an Agnes for me maybe every 5 years, because I don't think I could.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate how you have been able to like genre hop so much. I feel like my brain is just so like focused on one thing. It seems like.
It's funny, it is a little more rare, and I'm always interested in author journeys, like who is writing sort of in different genres. Like I don't know, I think I just crave novelty and like the new shiny thing, and being in the new shiny world. I always feel like I'm on like a semester abroad in every different book, and I just want to go different places. And I've been extremely lucky that I have a publishing team that has let me do that, because it's not ideal in some ways for branding and for sort of building your fan base. But I think it's just what my soul wanted to get up to, was to try a whole bunch of different things. And I think we're still going to continue to try different things. I'm going heavy on romance for my next book. That's like my new.
Ooh.
It's also, you read all these wonderful books, or all these wonderful books now, and I see what people are doing, and I'm like, I want to try that.
I do get that FOMO for sure. But yeah, when I had chatted with Jessie Sutanto a couple months ago, and she, is going all across the board between comedy, middle grade, thriller, contemporary, romance, all this stuff. And yeah, her agent has definitely been pitching her to like publishers as like, Jessie likes to do it all and wants to try everything. And
I love that
for her so far. Who knows?
I will say that like middle grade is the one jump that I haven't been able to make. And I think it's because there's a difference in the voice.
Yes.
I would have to like meditate very deeply for several years, I think, to find that middle grade voice. So in some ways, it's like easier to go between genres than between age demographics. And adult and YA are very similar, so that's not as big of a jump. But middle grade is really doing something special. And I always tell people it's harder than what I do. It's harder. So, to everyone who's bringing out great middle grade books right now, it's incredible.
There's so many. It's just like exploding everywhere. Do you think maybe, and this is just me speculating, once your daughter is more that age, you'll kind of maybe get a more of a taste of that voice and what it could be like.
It really could happen that way. Because of her, I dived very deeply into like picture books, and I had, people sending boxes of picture books when you're kids of these age. And so I will have a picture book out next June because I just got to like enjoy that a little bit. It's called Soul Step, and I'm writing it with my mother, Jill Parker Rhodes, and it's about a girl whose mother was in a step team. But yeah, she's like an inspiration for sure. So it could happen. It could happen. But who knows? Like maybe my mother will be just like, stay in your lane. And I'll be like, okay.
Yeah, I know you've given us a little hint of some other projects. Can you tell us about anything else that you've been working on or that's coming up?
I don't know that I can say anything for sure about it. I am like sort of tooling away at the very beginning stage. Which I know some people love, but I actually hate that feeling of not quite having my idea nailed down. I think it's close. I was sort of beat cheating and outlining the other day, so it's getting warmer, like in a couple weeks maybe. But until I start drafting and really until I get through the midpoint of the book, I can't say for sure that anything is going to survive. But I am looking at more historical, like examining more about white passing. I always got sisters or something like a sisterhood. Away from it. So, but also wanted to lean into more of like something romantic because I think that that's something that is a smaller part of my books that I have enjoyed so much. I want to bring it to life. So the answer is kind of like yes and no. I can't really say anything yet.
And you mentioned 1920s before, which I'm all here for. So
yes, really interesting decade.
Another question we like to ask is, can readers get signed copies of your books anywhere?
You can get signed copies from Third Place Books, and ideally contact them like in the next few days. I'm going to go sign there on Tuesday, and they say within 24 hours they can guarantee it. But if you call them and talk to them, I'll make sure that I can get you something signed. Definitely buy through them, support the indie bookstore. That's where my signings are coming from, and I would be beyond honored if you did that. They have an incredible thing going on over there at Third Place Books.
Yes, I will drop the link in the chat once we get it uploaded into the app for everyone.
But you can also email me. If you miss the deadline, I'm curious. Like my husband is like, you have to stop mailing people books, and I'm just like, I can't.
If you want to open that up to us, Kelly, we'll try not to take advantage of you.
I do. Yeah, I want to.
Well, another thing we like to end on is with any advice for aspiring authors who might be watching. If there's anything that you've touched on some, but any other possible ideas you might have.
I feel like I've given a lot of the sort of super fluffy advice, but the really hardcore advice that I have, persevere, keep going, don't quit. I mean, don't. You're the only one who can tell your stories. But find a structure system that you love, that works for you. It changed my life with Agnes. Like I did not know how to write a book. I did not mostly have the language for even figuring that out. And there's tons of like book structuring systems out there. I fell in love with Save the Cat.
Okay.
I recommend it because we all know that language from movies. But I really just believe there's something out there for everybody. But if you're a pantser, consider repentance. Okay. Just it's harder. It's harder. I used to be the same, but I just I recommend looking into structure to see if it can, because it can really help you.
No, I need to read the Save the Cat book because I just remember being in school and having to write an outline for a paper first and just hating it.
Yes, and that was a nonsense structure system. That was a this and this. It had no real. I'm all about the stuff with the real deal that really understands why we tell stories and sort of how to go through there.
Yes, I love it. We get so much different advice from every author, and I don't think anyone's touched on that in a while. So
I'd like to see the lightning round clips of every author. That'd be really cool.
That would take some editing. And Yeah. All right. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for being here. We love you. We're gonna email you again once we see your next announcement for your next book to have you come back. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. This is the best book club. I'm always thrilled to be here.
We love it. And thank you, The Nest, for being here. Our next author chat is happening on Wednesday, May 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern. I will be doing it again, and it will be with Alyssa Lynn Valdez, who is the author of Hollow Beasts. All right. Have a good night, everyone.